So we are here to make an amazing announcement and to have a conversation about something that is long overdue, a partnership that we're so excited about. And I guess we'll start by introducing each other so that everyone who is hearing our voice or watching us right now knows who we are.
Yes, and I will start with introductions. I am honored to introduce Dr. Monique W. Morris, an award-winning author and social justice scholar with 3 decades of experience in education, civil rights, juvenile and criminal justice. Dr. Morris is the executive producer and co-writer of the documentary film Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools, which is based on 2 of her books. Oh, come on. Sing a Rhythm, Dance, and Blues, Education for Liberation of Black and Brown Girls, and Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. She has authored books, dozens of articles, book chapters, and other publications on social justice issues, and lectured widely. Her 2018 TED Talk on ending the criminalization of Black girls in schools has translated into over 20 languages. Her new book, Muse to the Maestro, Educator Notes to Orchestrate an End to School Pushouts for Black Girls, will be published in the summer of 2022. Excited to read that. Dr. Morris has informed legislation and the development and implementation of approved, culturally competent, and gender responsive continua of services for youth. Her research intersects race, gender, education, and justice to explore the ways in which communities of color are uniquely affected by social policies. She is one of the co-founders of 1 Billion Black Girls Initiative, 1 Billion for Black Girls Initiative, my bad, and is the president and CEO of Grantmakers for Girls of Color.
Thank you for that. It is my extreme honor to now share your bio with everyone watching. Bree Rivera is a Black trans femme who has dedicated over 20 years of movement building for Black trans communities. She's a multi-published researcher working with both Wayne State University and the University of Michigan Schools of Public Health, and a writer and co-creator of the Femme Queen Chronicle, a series about the lives of Black trans women living in Detroit, Michigan. In 2020, Bree launched the Black Trans Fund, which is incubated by Groundswell Fund, the first fund centering joy and liberatory practices in Black transgender and gender expansive communities. Black trans leaders drive the mission and vision of the fund, create programming and make thoughtful grants to support Black trans joy and thriving. During its inaugural year, the BTF moved $500,000 to Black trans communities. Come through with a significant investment. Before her time at Black Trans Fund, Bree was a founder and executive director of Trans Sisters of Color Project in Detroit, the first Black trans-led organization in Michigan. Bree is very active in various movements, serving as a board member for Positive Women's Network USA, Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, Third Wave Fund, and our Grantmakers for Girls of Color. So pleased to be in conversation with you today.
You know, I got my little Florida water here because we're about to have some healing conversations about joy. Those are the things that are exciting me in my personal life. Excited to lead with that. And Monique, I have a question for you. You've done a lot of work over your couple of decades. And, just making sure that Black, brown girls have a space and a voice. And so really curious to hear a little bit from you about what's bringing you joy in this particular moment.
You know, what's bringing me joy in this moment is really the opportunity for us to course correct so much of what has been facilitating harm in our communities. I am so honored, humbled, and pleased to be part of the solution. For so many people, you know, they spend a lot of time in conversations about solutions and conversations about how to know and return to the source of well-being is not accessible. So what brings me joy is really the ability to work in community and to live in community, where I'm able to center the wisdoms of our ancestors, where I'm able to be in conversation and community building with people who are as dedicated to wellness as I am, who are as dedicated to our young people as I am, and who see that being involved in conversations, rigorous, hard conversations about where harm has impacted our communities doesn't mean we have to live in a space of harm. We can live in an aspirational space of healing and joy. And that is where I choose to spend my energy, is to really think about how we come together to honor what we know is possible. And that's really what where I focus my attention and you know what does it for me. Where are you finding joy outside of that water?
Come on, possibility. You know, joy work has always been the center of everything that I do. Just really wanting to name that for a long time in doing this work, I was always very clear that regardless to how much time and labor that Black trans folks provided to the larger movement, that there was always this idea that folks felt comfortable asking us to like show up for like legislation, policy, even in like HIV work, to move work for communities that aren't trans. And then, you know, when folks were constantly pushing back and saying that we needed more, folks would tell us like next time, or, you know, I think of like the election, not the election, I think of the work around like marriage equality and how trans folks were like, we need more than this. And then like gay, lesbian folks were like, do this work with us. And then when we got left behind, they were like, oh, okay, whatever. And so like, for me, I think one of the things that's bringing me joy is to be able to, one, run a fund that is for Black, trans, and gender expansive folks, where we make the decisions, we're in control. And quite frankly, nobody can tell us what to do. Actually, that's not true. Black trans folks tell us what to do all the time. And that's not a judgment. Actually brings me a lot of joy because one of the things that I'm very clear about is that there's not a fund that actually is able to respond to community as quickly as we do. BNHD all the time, Hunter Day. We're always having conversation about what's not working and how do we fix it. And even in the moments where it's like frustrating, where we don't feel like we have a lot of control, I think the joy comes out because we're actually able to be responsive and shift and, you know, actually center the folks that, you know, we're doing this work on behalf of. And so every day, regardless if I'm struggling or frustrated, you know, when we start having conversations about Black Trans Fund, it's like an immediate like mood shifter where I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to like experience joy despite everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's interesting because we always come to this work with our full selves. We are living these experiences or have lived experiences that inform the decisions that we make and the ways that we move together, which is what makes this announcement about our collective project, the Holding a Sister initiative, all the more exciting, because it's not just people saying we need to do something in response to them. It is a collective of us informing how we move together in a way to deepen our relationships. We're calling it Holding a Sister Fund, not, or the Holding a Sister Initiative, not something else that doesn't speak to what our needs are, but also what our goals and aspirations are, especially around young people, right? Like, we know that there's a major lack of data around the issues that impact trans and gender expansive youth of color. Many of the conversations that are held in our spaces around girls and femmes don't emphasize what is happening among youth of color, and especially in philanthropy, where we're explicitly occupying a space, explicitly taking on a conversation and holding that space with and for the folks that we name in this work. So I don't know, I feel like there's much that you have to offer from your years of doing work in this space, but I would love to spend a little bit of time asking you to unpack a little bit of how, how this conversation and our understanding of gender equity has revolved around whiteness to the extent that it has facilitated an erasure of trans and gender expansive youth of color, even though they're at the center and always have been at the center of movements seeking equity and justice in these spaces. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that before we unpack how we're planning to be involved in some of the solutions to this misguided narrative.
Yeah. One thing I will say that I've learned from countless youth in my years of doing this work is that adults, we've gotten it wrong, where we, assume that because of someone's age and experience that they don't know, and that they need more time to mature. And as a mature person, watching other mature people navigate the world, it's really interesting how adults have no grasp of gender. They have no grasp of sexuality and what that means and how that shows up for people. And in all actuality, in my own personal gender justice journey and just unpacking the things that I've been taught about my own gender, coming to two conclusions. One, that a lot of adults are living in fear and won't even explore what it means to be whatever gender that they're showing up in in the world, right? And how when trans folks, GMC folks who have explored their gender and are very clear, question that, people freak out and they get upset and they cling onto these ideas of gender that, as a Black Pan-Africanist, understanding that my ancestors before they were colonized didn't see or perform gender in the ways in which that white people do. And taking it a step further, I've always struggled with my power as a Black femme and a woman being masculinized, right? And also just kind of realizing that that is womanhood from a frame of whiteness, where women have to be weak, meek, silent, right? Supportive of men, despite all of their crap, right? And how when you are a woman, particularly Black, brown, and you show up in your gender with some type of assertiveness and also claim your womanness, that's questioned, dissected, criminalized. And for me, moving away from all of those things and reclaiming my power as a person who may be seen in the world as like a masculine woman, right? And understanding that I come from a long legacy of queens, a long legacy of women who actually held it down, right? Held it down better than the men. And for me, just kind of realizing that not only have we been kind of like taught to not embrace the power in our womanhood as like Black people, I'm using Black people because I'm Black, but also because our history has been erased, like a lot of us just don't know who we are. And I'm very clear in saying that I fully don't have an understanding of who I am as a Black person in this world, in this country, and that I'm working on it. And would like to invite and encourage more folks to do that exploration for two reasons. One, having a better sense of self. Always just more like freeing and liberating. And I want to be liberated every day, all day. And I think two, doing the journey within yourself, even if you don't come to any different conclusions about your gender and how you show up in the world, will actually allow folks to be able to see the unique intersections that cis folks and trans folks have in our battle for collective liberation, and will allow folks to actually be more thoughtful in the ways in which that they show up in movement. Because yeah, I feel like one of the things that's been really harmful, especially for like young folks, is that we're so quick to, when things make us uncomfortable, just dismiss it. And we've dismissed a whole generation of young people who are brilliant and who actually have the tools to help us get free. Mm-hmm. And we have done a disservice to not only the young people that we've left behind, but we also have done a disservice to ourselves as folks who are still trying to figure out who we are.
Thank you for that. You know, so much of what you're sharing around the communities we dismiss speak to the way that our society decides who is disposable and who is not. And, you know, like I've written whole books about how that's problematic, right? And how we do possess the power to shift that narrative. And, you know, when we think about what's happening in our communities and we recognize that those who are deemed disposable are just so much more likely to experience conditions that can undermine their humanity, right? And you were talking about gender, but in many ways, what we're talking about is, you know, in our collective desire to explore liberatory practices is for us to seek a return to a recognition of our core humanity. You know, we see the elevated rates of attempted suicide among trans communities. There are a host of stats, including the data from the new survey by the Center for American Progress, which showed that 68% of transgender respondents of color report experiencing some form of discrimination or mistreatment from healthcare providers, including care refusal, misgendering, verbal and physical abuse. Just, we could tick through all the things that happen in our communities when a community is deemed disposable. And what I love about our project and our intentional way that we're coming together in holding a sister initiative is to say, we don't believe that, right? We never believed that. And we recognize that transgender and gender expansive youth of color not only deserve to have their humanity respected, but they deserve to be heard, to experience joy, to experience safety and freedom, and to grow up healthy and thriving. The conditions that you were describing, even, you know, we think about them in adult form. They don't start with adulthood, right? They start when young people are so, you know, vulnerable to systems, vulnerable to those adults with decision-making power. this in many ways, because both of our organizations move with an intention to center the guidance and leadership of those who are most impacted by our work. We do respond to those who tell us what to do. And our girls are telling us what they need, right? Our young people, our girls and femmes and gender expansive young people have been telling us for years that they need our investment, they need our attention, they need our allyship, they need us to stand with them, they need us to hold them as adults in this space. And so, what's exciting, I think, about the possibility of this partnership is that we're not, yes, we are, the first national fund in the country dedicated, in the collective initiative to resourcing trans and gender expansive youth of color, but we don't intend to be the last of this kind of partnership, right? We are a significant, partner in joining, a community of funders for trans people of color, which you're tied to explicitly: Black Trans Fund, Third Wave, Black Trans Travel Fund, Fund for Trans Generations. But we also really want to make sure that we're moving in a direction where this is business as usual, where in so much of our conversations about intersectionality in philanthropy, so many of our conversations about how we build out robust systems of giving in philanthropy, talk about communities, but don't do it in a way that demonstrate that they also possess the wisdom to inform how we can make this business as usual. So, I want to thank you for being open and coming, into conversation with G4GC to say, I think we can do something different here. And I think we can do something that is robust, that is participatory, that can shift how we even talk about grant making within our communities. And you've been at this longer than I have. But I love that we both come from an understanding that challenges us to do better.
Yeah. I think one of the things that movement has taught me is that I'm a solution, right? And I think there were folks who have invested in my leadership in multiple ways and have allowed me to be able to be the person that I am that runs a fund. Also really wanting to name, like, Monique, you, the folks at G4GC have held me in multiple ways as I moved into this larger role within philanthropy. It hasn't been easy, of course, and you know that. I think folks really have a hard time following the leadership of Black women, especially like Black, queer, and trans folks too. Just wanting to name that. But, I think the most powerful thing about the Black Trans Fund is that it was Black women, gay Black men who really supported us when we didn't have any money. We were trying to figure it out, right? And so, Holding a Sister Fund, the name just kind of came organically. We were all sitting on the phone, just laughing and, talking about the real issues that get in the way of us being able to support girls of color, right? And I know we were speaking about it from a Black lens, right? But I think a lot of it is just kind of speaks to just people of color in general. And so for me, knowing that this partnership is not just about making thoughtful grants and being in communication, but G4GC put up a lot of money, not only to make sure that we're making thoughtful grants to trans girls of color, but that we're also investing in Black trans girls too. And I think that's important. And, work that needs to be centered. And so for me, just really wanting to name that, I think there is a misconception in the world that Black cis and trans women, we can't get along, that there's competition, is that we're always trying to one up each other. And that this relationship doesn't feel like that. The relationship I have with Black women doesn't feel like that. Even when Black women say or do transphobic things that may hurt my feelings or have an impact on me, I'm also just very clear that we don't get an opportunity to actually have conversations with each other about gender, how we show up in the world, and how we should be protecting each other. And so for me, I'm always struck by like, what work do I need to do in order to strengthen my relationship with Black women? And I think this is a key piece. Like, not only are we making these thoughtful grants, but there's also like a narrative research piece that we're working on to just kind of figure out like, what are the intersections and what are the problems that's keeping us from like working together, resourcing each other, and building a stronger movement for girls of color for the future.
Right. I appreciate that because we'll run the fund as partners, right? And as part of that, we're working to collect the narratives from our communities and share that within philanthropy and externally so that we understand better how to build those relationships that you're talking about, right? Through the initiative, it's our goal to raise and distribute $1 million in the first year, to focus those funds on ensuring that trans and gender expansive youth of color, particularly those who are marginalized from many of our conversations and grant-making strategies, are involved in decision-making processes. So there is a way that we're trying to broaden the scope of who's in the circle with us. And make sure we can see folks. When I came on to G4GC, I said to you and I said to every member of our advisory committee, our then advisory committee, now advisory board, and an extended network of people, that I really wanted to make sure that girls of color see themselves in us, right? That girls and femmes of color are able to look at G4GC, look at our partners, look at the people we go into community with and say, oh, there I am, right? And I'm here because we are trying to shift the conversation about marginalization, right? Shift the conversation about who is worthy of our investment. What is investment? What does it mean to robustly resource our communities? And as you mentioned, it means more than moving thoughtful grants. Certainly includes moving thoughtful grants, but it's not, only about that. It's about building the community. And so I loved that, in the course of you talking, you were like, I'm feeling holding a sister, right? Like I'm feeling like we need to be in a space where we can speak to some of the wisdoms we carry in our bones around how we communicate with each other, how we move together, and how we hold each other in what is, not just this sort of national moment of crisis around the pandemic or national moment of crisis around racial injustice, which has been a long-standing part of the American narrative and global narrative, particularly with respect to anti-Blackness and anti-Black trans identities. And so it is important for us to shift it. I'm really about and most excited about this partnership because it allows for us to do that kind of engagement and to challenge ourselves with a rigor that is necessary in this moment and beyond. So I just want to thank you and also, really consider that this is an opportunity for us to raise questions, right? I feel that this initiative, we're calling it an initiative, not just a fund, because we're going to raise more questions than we have answers to at this moment. But we can't find ourselves in the solution the way movement has taught us to locate ourselves unless we're asking questions and intentionally seeking to center those who have been marginalized from even the question-making process, right?
No, that's so true. Yeah.
So I love that, we have this opportunity for us to think through things. I love that we have an opportunity to imagine what's possible with the funds. And I also love that we have an opportunity to think about what success will look like with the fund and with the initiatives.
Yeah. Success. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Um, ooh, I feel successful every day. Yeah, I think I am really invested in holding communities in the way in which I've been held. And I feel like success comes when you least expect it. So like, I think one of the things that I had to like relearn is like success isn't how many times your fund gets shared on social media or like the visibility of like your fund, but it's really about folks on the ground and like their experience and accessibility to your funds, programs. And I was having a conversation with one of our advisors. And it's just been a rough year for everyone. And our advisors have been struggling with like climate change, pandemic stuff, family situations, transphobia. And, one of our advisors just reminded me that we are doing people first work, not production first work. And I sat with that for a minute. And he also just reminded me that, at BTF, we make a lot of space for folks to experience humanness. And I sat with that for a long time. And that was something yesterday that made me feel just really successful. And so just wanting to name that like a lot of BTF success is actually community success. And that's when our communities feel empowered, resourced, powerful. That's when we feel successful. But Monique, I think one of the things that's been really successful about this collaboration with G4GC is that it has helped us at BTF think more deeply about the narratives that we need to start collecting and some strategy around like pushing those narratives out so that folks can actually see the full breadth of the work that we are moving from a place of joy and liberation, which is hard for folks to grasp, right? I think there's two things. We need to be clear that not a lot of folks in the world are actually experiencing true joy and liberation.
So do they even know what it looks like, right?
They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what it sounds like. They wouldn't know it if it brushed up across them in a grocery store. They lost, right? And I'm also clear that in my career, there have been multiple moments where folks have reminded me that Black people in particular don't deserve joy. And so every day that I wake up, even when I'm not experiencing joy, even when I don't feel liberated, when a grantee texts me, or we get an email about how a grantee has like transformed their organization and unlocked new funds, that's the stuff that just reminds me that one, this fund is necessary. Two, it also just reminds me that a lot of the work in BTF can't be siloed. We have never been doing this work as Black trans people on behalf of just Black trans communities. It's for everyone. And so I'm glad to be able to be in this particular partnership where we are able to like live that out and show that like Black trans folks are winning. Black cis girls are winning. Girls of color are winning, right? And be able to like center that work, support it, and be thoughtful around it. But also, it doesn't feel like a battle all the time. I feel like I show up at the meetings, I say what I say, the people hear me, and then we make decisions, right? And so it doesn't feel like heavy, doesn't feel burdensome. It doesn't feel like I'm like a token. It really feels like we are coming together, moving funds out of love, not only for the group, our advisory group, because I love everyone and I know we all love each other, right? But I think it's a deeper love and appreciation of where we came from. I remember as a young person, having the joy and liberation beat out of me, criminalized, all of the things. And feeling beat up as an adult trying to do this work with folks. And, G4GC, this partnership is just, it's not the space for that. And I'm happy to be able to be held by such a diverse group of folks who not only hold me to the fire, but also help me understand who I am as a person and walk with me every day.
Yeah, as you were talking, I kept thinking about how much of the public's understanding of girls of color is framed through the narrative of trauma and pain. Too many of us have stories about having our joy taken from us, stripped from us, challenging us to hold on to it. And yet somehow we find, basically, I just think we are miracles, right? And I understand that there is this danger in understanding the girlhood of young people of color as something magical. But it's also, I think the only word we have in this language to capture the resilience and heart that is required to come from a community, a society that renders you disposable and still come back and create all the things that people take and understand to be cool, to understand to be relevant, so we're simultaneously irrelevant and relevant, right? All the language comes from our communities, all the dances come from our communities, all the culture comes from our communities, cited and uncited. And also at the same time, what we're trying to do with this fund is not just establish that we are here for entertainment, right? We're understanding that while entertainment is absolutely a source of healing in a grand narrative of oppression, that there's so much more to our young people, cis and trans girls and femmes of color, that can invite us into a new space and new understanding of what is possible in our communities. And I love that you were elevating this idea that we're not in competition with each other. With G4GC, and with many communities, there's always this sort of tension in philanthropy and beyond about who's in competition with each other around certain, funding sources or narrative or, engagements. But, as far as we're concerned, we follow the leadership of Audre Lorde, who invited us to understand that there is no hierarchy of oppressions. And so in my mind, that translates to us not seeking to be in competition, but rather in community with each other. And that is where the liberation happens. That is where the healing happens. That is where the joy resides.
Okay.
And it's interesting because a lot of times people think that justice, I often say that justice is not a pie to be divvied, right? That there is as much justice as there is possibility, and that are, for our imaginations to fully understand what we're capable of in community, we have to let go of this idea that we are competing against each other for resources, or that resources are limited. What I love about our project is that, and what I love about the work we're doing, at G4GC with our various other initiatives too, is to think about this from a perspective of abundance. We are not operating from a deficit model. We are operating through a lens of abundance. And when we do that, we embrace all that is possible rather than restricting ourselves to what has occurred already. Right?
Okay.
So, as far as I'm concerned, we have a chance to ask new questions. We have a chance to build new partnerships. We have a chance to think about what doesn't exist already, or that exists in small part that should be developed in grand scale. And to really think through, what that means for how we understand giving. And I said it before, I'll say it again, what that means for us to be able to resource abundantly, right? To resource our communities in a way that can transform not just the conditions that people live in, but also what we think about our communities and how we live in them.
Yeah. Yeah, abundance is definitely where we live too. It's where BTF resides. But I think that's why we center everything around joy and liberation. When I started this fund and folks were like, what makes your fund different? Similar to your point, I'm like, if we fund Black trans communities from a place of joy and liberation, that unlocks possibilities, right? That weren't possible before. And I'm saying that particularly around like, you know, we've seen a lack of analysis around like how a lot of the structures that are set up to be anti-trans actually have bigger impacts on other communities. And really wanting to get folks to be able to like see that and to move differently. I think one of the things that it reminded me of was like, you know, in my work, I'm always just thinking about just larger impact of like what's happening in the world, legislation, policy that's being enacted that is designed to be anti-trans, but actually has impact, particularly on Black women. And it reminds me of, you know, I was growing up and doing like some research on like just Black people. And I remember reading something that didn't make sense to me at that point, but now is very clear. They were talking about like masculinizing Black women and the impacts that it had on Black women and not really being able to like put two and two together. And then, you know, it took for me to get older. And doing this work, you know, I lived in a state where we were proposing a bathroom bill, and none of the Black trans girls that we were organizing with had ever had that experience, been pulled out of a bathroom, asked to leave a bathroom, had to fight for the bathroom that they chose to use. They just used them. And to keep hearing from Black cis women, particularly masculine of centered women, talk about being accosted in bathrooms and having security called on them and being like dragged out of facilities. And was like, And then, you know, 3 years ago, that's when it really hit. I was like, oh, wow. Like, you know, people are going to keep making these bills that are anti-trans, and they're going to have a direct impact on Black women because we still haven't gotten clear around the ways in which that society strips us of our womanhood and of our feminines, right? And like seeing that play out now, like women at the Olympics being asked to perform gender tests, like, and one, how when you look at the people who are actually like rallying around and like asking for those type of tests to be happening, it's not Black people asking for a gender test for another Black person, right? It's people outside of who we are as people saying that we don't want you to win. Let's be clear, right? And the same ways in which that like people are nitpicking up against the Black women about winning. Serena Williams all the time. People say horrible things about her, but she's winning, right? And they don't want her to win. And so when we actually transform the ways in which that we like think about how we show up for each other, right? That means actually having a good enough analysis to be able to hear, see, and react, right? And also just bringing into the space that centering the joy and liberation of Black trans folks actually allows all of us to experience joy and liberation. Because when I think of all of my close confidants who are like Black and trans and who have helped me with my own gender analysis, no shade, my niece is 4 years old and she helps me with my gender analysis every day. She FaceTime me, be like, hey, TT. And you know, we talk. She tells me about what's going on in her life. she supports me. She corrects folks when they get it wrong. And, she'd be like, that's my auntie. Like, you wrong, right? And to like get that kind of like gas from a 4-year-old, right? Who she don't know her ABCs, but she knows gender, right? She knows gender better than a lot of folks. And she knows that it's consensual, that like you have to ask folks and give permission. And that's not because she's been taught, it's just because she just lives her life in the world, right? And to think about how the freedom and liberation and just allowing people to be, especially girls, and the impact that it'll have on society, because we will be raising a generation of folks who, HD said it so perfectly yesterday, where the trauma, the drama, discrimination is just here and it's floating around and we know it's there, but because we have the things that we need, because we feel supported and held, that joy that we experience negates all of those things that are happening around us, because we know that they're there, they're going to be there for a long time, but it's not the focus. And we get a chance to like breathe and actually be seen as full individuals, which unlocks possibilities. And so one of the things that I'm excited about for G4GC and unlocking possibilities is for us to have some real conversation and do some like narrative shifting and research collecting about the experiences of girls of color and what that means to like the work that we're moving now, and what should we be funding in the future? What safeguards should we be supporting? Because I'm very clear, this pandemic has just reminded me that conditions are not going to get better anytime soon, right? And so for me, instead of investing in all of the things that have failed us, the state particularly, seeing more of an investment in communities and folks on the ground that are doing this work. And to me, I think the folks that are like doing this work without thought and naturally are women and girls, right? Particularly girls. And so excited to be able to like invest in that type of joy and liberation at this particular moment.
So I'm hearing some background noise and I'm going to close my door just to make sure that it's not being picked up. So 1 second, please.
I gotta cut the noise. Seems like it always happens that way. My phone never wants to tell me that my connection is poor until I start talking to Black trans folks. So
I think we've handled it. But voices carry and volume is good in our communities, just not when we're recording. Anyhow, I think, in the time that we have left in this conversation, I'd love for us to be able to shift our gaze a little bit and start to think about what we're asking of philanthropy. So much of philanthropy has been silent on conditions that impact cis and trans girls and femmes of color. And so we're in a space together where, as I've said before, we're moving away from being marginalized in the conversation and trying to center those who have been who have experienced some of the deepest harm from structures of oppression, but not talk about only those structures of oppression, though we will talk about them because we want them dismantled, but also to invest in the things that we know to facilitate so much healing and joy in our communities, and particularly among our young people. So when we think about how we are calling upon philanthropy, what are some of the things that you hope we're able to see or able to shift in the sector?
I think one of the things that we are both doing very well is like centering and involving the communities that we are raising funds on behalf of. So like the advisory committees with all of the different funds, especially like getting young folks acclimated to how philanthropy works and giving them money to move, I think is innovative, and would like to see more of that in philanthropy. Also, I think intentionality is something I would like to call to the carpet for philanthropy to just think about a little bit more deeply. I feel like philanthropy wants to be able to have ownership of the success of our communities, and it should actually be the other way around. The communities are doing the work. We are funding them at small levels a lot of times, right? And we should just be giving money away and allowing folks to determine what success looks like for them and allowing them to like bask in it. I see that a lot in philanthropy where they're like, we gave this group $100,000 and look at them be successful. And it's like, okay, yeah, you gave them money and I think also like one of the things I would like to see from philanthropy and just larger movement in general is more conversations and a growth of analysis around gender. I'm very clear that like we are leading the charge and like kind of doing that right now with intention. And I think you just can't do that work without intention. And so, yeah, those are like my 3 things I would like to offer up to philanthropy. Now I'm gonna ask you, Monique. No shade, like I really admire you and just like all of your accolades. I've always wanted to be a doctor, but also like, so like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that you have a wealth of suggestions as to like what philanthropy could be doing differently to support girls of color in this particular time.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I enter this space in many ways, not wearing a hat of traditional philanthropy and rejecting some of the things that I have learned and observed over the years about how philanthropy sees itself in conversation with those who, in my mind, have the greatest degree of expertise on where investments have the greatest impact. I think there's something to be said for those of us who have been involved in movement work and who have been involved in scholarship development, you know, to now be in a position to distribute funds into communities. You know, there's something to be said about putting us in these positions that I think is very valuable. And so one, I'll say, you know, more of that, right? I want to see more of the people who have been closest to some of the conditions in our communities that speak to the need for transformation and liberation practices to take place, to be in positions where they can also make decisions about how money is moving toward the goal of abundantly resourcing well-being in those spaces. So, you know, I would like to see philanthropy see itself as a real partner. I want philanthropy to also understand that it participates in some of the harm that takes place in our communities with cis and trans girls and femmes of color by conflating some of their experiences with those of women in their communities. That sometimes we think about the conditions of those who are fully out of their adolescence. And, you know, and we think that it just either immediately, automatically, and, you know, in imitation form replicates in the lives of young people. And that's not necessarily true. I think there are conditions that are shared, but this, you know, is an opportunity for philanthropy to also understand how young people who are wrestling with gender, young people who are experiencing society's perceptions of their gender and treating them in manners that, you know, often undermine their access to equity and equal opportunity, you know, in ways that, you know, really invite us into a deeper understanding and exploration, again, of what is real versus what is perceived. And so there's a lot that we can learn, you know, from this effort that I think will help philanthropy also understand that it may have the money and it is necessary for us to move resources, but that the money and the resources that we're stewarding are ultimately accountable to communities, and not the other way around. Like the communities aren't necessarily accountable to us without there being some reciprocity there. I'm hopeful that through the Holding a Sister initiative and the other work that we're involved in at G4GC, we're able to really bring people to a space of understanding around what it means to have a reciprocal relationship with community, the value of having reciprocity as a central practice. And, and I'm hopeful that philanthropy will not see, or the sort of traditional institutional philanthropy doesn't see itself as an outsider that cannot play a role in helping to shift some of that understanding. That this is a collective process, that when you are an intermediary, you often function between worlds, right? But that doesn't mean that both worlds the other sides of the intermediary or all the sides of the intermediary don't have any opportunity to interact with each other. That we're a broader community that is trying to hold the space, right? To ensure that there isn't the erasure that has happened in the past. And I think that given our intention, to your point around how this has to be intentional, our intention to shift narrative and to move a greater degree of resources to respond to the unique needs of our young people of color, that we'll be able to do some of that really hard work. But I need philanthropy to be open, right? I need philanthropy to think about this as a new way of doing business as usual, to think outside of silos about what they support and understand that every issue, I often say, every issue is a girl of color issue, right? Every issue. So as we're thinking about all of the things that philanthropy supports and the ways that our communities give and show love and show resources to each other to support well-being, that we're able to fully embrace really the totality of our communities, but also the rigor of the emergent narratives that guide what it is that we're trying to do here and with our community of partners. So we are not in this alone. I don't want philanthropy to think that it's just the two of us.
Okay, because it's not.
And to understand that what we're doing with this initiative is calling some we're being intentional with calling attention to one of our communities and calling for a deeper investment in their well-being. And that to me is really at the center of what is possible, but also I will argue is probable.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. And we are not trying, we are doing it.
Right.
Yeah. And someone had to remind me that the other day. They're like, stop saying what you're trying to do. You are doing. You are funding communities. You're being thoughtful. You're bringing folks along. And so just wanting to name that. We are doing it. Okay.
That's right. So it's funny how we come together, because I met you through a convening that was done by Nikisha Lewis. We're going to bring Nikisha into this.
Oh.
And I believe we were in New Orleans for a convening that the Ms. Foundation was doing that said they wanted to really think about justice through a unique lens that is probably one of the more intersectional articulations of justice that we have seen in philanthropy. And that I always believe that we're in a space for a reason, and we meet the people that we're supposed to meet for a reason. And at the time when you walked in, you had a presence and a beauty and a grace and a sophistication that invited rigor. I just saw rigor all over you. And I think that, I seek that out in people because I think it's important for us not to only be in philanthropic spaces and try to figure out who we want to have a drink with or who we want to talk to about things that align with our interests. We may not know where the alignment is, but to be open to have conversations about some of the things that we know to be true in our communities, and that is that we want to seek an abundant resourcing of joy and liberation, right? And whatever that looks like is, I think where the ongoing work happens over the years. And so, you were one of the first people I called when I was trying to put together an advisory group for G4GC, because I really wanted to make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable to our full body of communities, and to ensure that when we're talking about young girls and femmes of color, that we are moving with the same intention that we've been talking about this entire hour that we've been in conversation with each other, right? But I'm grateful for that moment. So I just want to call attention to that, the fact that convening spaces are important. Opportunities for us to have conversations with each other are important in philanthropy, so that we know each other and that we know what is possible with each other. And at the time, neither of us was in philanthropy, right? But we were coming together in a way that provided an opportunity, or we're actually coming together because of the vision of someone in philanthropy who understood that there was a unique need and interest in having the bodies in the room that were in the room, right?
Okay. Nikisha Lewis.
The bodies in the room.
Okay. Nikisha Lewis actually was responsible for the organization that we created in Detroit, getting our first big grant. And so, yeah, to be able to full circle, Nikisha is GOAT. But yeah, one of the things that I think has been the most inspirational through this process is that I don't feel like I have to fight, or I feel like I say things and folks are like, we see it, we get it. Even if folks don't, they sit with it for a minute and we have conversation. And I think that's the best part of building a movement. I don't say things with the intent of people just trusting, because I feel like that's a process. You have to go and get on your own journey as to what's going on around you and how you see it and absorb it. But yeah, I feel like this entire process has been a blessing and one of my safe places within philanthropy, because it's one space where I don't have to fight. It's one space where we are in constant communication and doing all the rigorous work of understanding and getting to a clear place with each other. And so that's been a blessing. And I'm always excited to do this work with Black women. So there's that, especially Black doctors. Come on. So just wanting to uplift you and love on you, because to be honest, you didn't have to do any of the things that you've done for me in the last 2 years. The money that and resources that G4GC has afforded to BTF has just unlocked a lot of possibilities for us, and actually have released some of the burden on me. I feel successful as a fundraiser and as a person who's building thoughtful partnerships. And so really wanting to thank you and uplift your leadership, and excited about what we have planned in the future, because it's cooking.
You already know. But I do want to say, that I think as we move forward in this partnership, we will invite others to join in, that as we're mobilizing resources and as we're mobilizing philanthropy to think about how it is being in partnership with us, we'll be asking for them to do a better job of capturing data about where their resources are moving, understanding that we are building out resources to help support that process, and that we'll look for this to be seen as an opportunity to join our community. I think it's worth repeating that we are in community, not competition. And this is a project, holding a sister initiative is a project that is rooted in love and the foundational understanding that abundant investment in cis and trans girls and femmes of color is possible and probable, and we're doing it.
Okay, every day.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be in this conversation with you, Bree, as always.
Same, always.
And special thanks to Jaron and Candace for your effortless interpretation. We appreciate you.